barbarians are at the gates. Actually, I think they've torn down the gates.
But where were the Kenyan people, the middle class for starters over the years? Where were the educated economic professors and social scientists, the opposition in which Raila has been the leader with massive following, and the civil groups to educate Kenyans on the impact of the debt? It is not like Raila did not speak up, he spoke, but in Nairobi about the Eurobond.
A record-breaking robbery. I shall introduce Kenya's Eurobond in broad terms. The consultant will then give a detailed presentation on the various aspects of the Eurobond. I will then make concluding remarks. Then I will take your questions. I believe that in the Eurobond saga, we are staring at the theft of public resources on a scale never seen before in our country. The theft has been achieved through international money laundering by elements of the Jubilee administration, working in cahoots with the leading international banks and money laundering experts.
In the villages, he promised Kenyans he would be right presidential candidate to make a difference. The former Auditor General Edward Uko spoke too. Jacob Juma, who was allegedly deleted under mysterious circumstances, spoke. But where have we all been? For the religious leaders, did they ever know anything?
They're out there saying that we have borrowed money and talking about fake roads. There's no roads being built. There's no roads being done. So Larry, we're here today to say that the 200 billion supposedly stolen from the Eurobond, we want to show you where that money has actually gone.
It all started with the utterances of one man, Jimmy Wanjigi, and the famous term he's been using over the last 1 to 2 years, odious debt, also known as illegitimate debt.
Don't we have institutions that carry out the mandate of the Constitution? Why do we need private citizens in the likes of Jimmy Wanjigi coming out, who are actually part of the establishment? They're only coming out because the establishment is somehow done with such individuals. So they're coming back and taking a hit at them.
The big question here then is, should Kenya pay this money
No,
that's due in 2024?
no. First and foremost, in fact, in totality, we should not pay it as $2 billion. We did not approve it anywhere in our budgets, in our parliament, for any development project. The whole 2 billion, forget about even just the 1 billion we cannot find. The entire 2 billion, we did not approve. We also never approved for it to go into funny accounts all over the place, like New York. We did not approve. That is not our law.
It has taken Kenyans some time to understand it. The common mwananchi in Kenya for the past 2 years has known nothing but high cost of living, inability to access basic services like healthcare, salary delays, and unimaginable struggle to afford the basics for a dignified life. It took the fall of the Finance Bill 2024 through a fearless protest led by the young people in Kenya, leading to their occupation of Parliament on the 25th of June 2024. For many Kenyans to realize there was more than what met the eye. Before Kenyans could open and close their eyes, the Kenyan oligarchy, the so-called the political class of Kenya, have quickly come together through a broad-based government to calm the Kenyan people down.
William ni mtu yangu. Sisi tulikuwa na wao. Mudavadi alikuwa hapa. Ruto alikuwa hapa. Uhuru alikuwa hapa. Uhuru na Mudavadi walikuwa naibu wangu kama waziri mkuu. Unajua mna hiyo. Alafu William akawa pale. Mimi nikaweka yeye waziri wa kilimo. Sivyo? Sasa ile nchi inachomeka, Uhuru ndiye alinipiga mimi simu. Uhuru akaniambia mimi tafuta Bwana Ruto ongea na yeye. Kenya ikichomeka hatakuwa na nchi nyingine. mpaka hii tuzime hii moto, watu waketi chini waendelee waliwane. William ndiye akanitafuta na mimi nikaongea na yeye wazi kabisa. Mimi unajua mambo yangu, mimi sificheki mambo, nasema direct. Magazeti hapa naandika sijui nini, Raila na Ruto handshake. Hakuna handshake. Hakuna handshake.
John Perkins, in his book Confessions of an Economic Hitman, explained how developed nations use debt to control developing countries by luring them into accepting large loans for infrastructure projects that are often unnecessary, overpriced, or destined to fail.
The presidents of these countries knew that if they accepted the loans, they were putting their countries deep into debt, but they were going to get wealthy off this. Their families were going to benefit because they owned the businesses, they owned the industries, they owned the things that were helped by electricity and so forth. But there was another incentive for them, and that was that what we call jackals were in the background. And these are CIA assets usually, who overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders.
These loans are provided by financial institutions such as the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and are facilitated by local elites in Kenya who understand the local politics so well. Kenya is now sinking in a ship carrying a very huge debt because the money that has been borrowed for the past 20 years has to flow back to the multinational corporations in developed countries.
Bill Clinton said it's about the economy. Politics, everything always goes back to the economy. So it's like the multinationals and the IMF, can they stay back with the odious debt? I doubt. If my interest is in taking possession of the wristband that you have, I will do every single thing to have it. Controlling Kenya is you're controlling a very powerful country in the east, in the eastern part of Africa, and in essence, you have access to Asia and the Middle East to a greater extent. So I don't think these guys will back off.
GDP, gross domestic product, and other statistics are very skewed to the rich. And so the rich were getting rich, but the poor were getting poorer because money was being diverted from health care, education, and other social services, and just basic foods and supplies to pay off the loans.
Where it came from, whether or not there were even any projects implemented. The IMF has already stepped into Kenya to ensure the country complies with its demands of adopting austerity measures, including privatizing key industries. And who knows, as alleged by John Perkins in his book Open the country's economy for exploitation.
Monetary Fund, the IMF, which has called for reform of 20 state-owned enterprises as part of the conditions attached to the 255 billion shilling loan approved by the fund's board last Friday. Among the state-owned enterprises that IMF wants reformed are Kenya Airways, Kenya Railways Corporation, Kenya Power and the Kenya Ports Authority. The fund has given the government of Kenya until the end of May 2021 to prepare an in-depth financial evaluation of the top 20 state-owned enterprises, which present the largest fiscal risks to the government.
Let's get back to Jimmy Wanjingi's analogy for a moment. Jimmy Wanjingi has been part of the establishment, the Kenyan elite, with international connections to the corporation, so he must understand the game so well.
Gazette notice by the 16th. If he signs that notice, that Gazette notice, and he accepts something called odious debt, he has fallen into the trap. If I were him, I would be very careful what the Treasury officials ask him to sign. Very careful. If they even tell him this is normal, they are lying to him. It's a criminal. Those are the ones you should be saying I should be fearing. Because it's a criminal mafia beyond your imagination that has made sure we are an enslaved nation and will be for many years to come unless we solve this problem now.
Jimmy Wanjigi is part of the system in this particular way. This is how important this figure is.
And this is why Behind the scenes, it was alleged that he played a key role in the Anglo leasing scandal that unfolded between 2003 to 2004. It was alleged that Jimmy was a facilitator and a broker who orchestrated the Anglo leasing contracts. It was alleged that he benefited significantly from the scandal, but because of the fictitious nature of the transactions involving offshore accounts, Kenya could not recover the money. About 56 billion Kenya shillings, which had been drawn from public coffers through the Ministry of Finance and the Office of the President during Kibaki era, was lost in this scandal. The contracts he is alleged to have procured included passports, forensic laboratories, and naval ships, but many of the companies involved were either non-existent or failed to deliver the promised goods and services. Jimmy Wanjigi got the attention of the Kenyan people too well when the police went to his house, and after a whole night's search, they could not find him. Yet he claimed to have been somewhere in his compound. Being the wealthy man that he is, with influence on policy, he may have been either hiding in bunker or no one really knows, but he is definitely a rich man with connections. Many Kenyans are now asking themselves, just why did Ruto become his enemy while he played a very significant role in funding the Jubilee Alliance party that brought him into power in 2013?
That story, we're getting another loan from the IMF, 257 billion Kenya shillings or so. There's an online petition on change.org asking IMF to recall the loan. Over 200,000 endorsements from Kenyans. Dr. Kitui, would you sign that petition, joining those who want IMF to cancel the loan?
I can understand the reason why they are raising that petition, but I will not sign it.
Why?
One important reason. If you do not get the IMF loan, you are going to the commercial markets for a Eurobond 4, which has a larger cost and cannot be rescheduled, unlike the IMF one. If by signing a petition for IMF not to give us money, we're guaranteed we're not going to borrow, that will be a different story from blocking concessional money and then going to the commercial markets like government is likely to do. But there's another thing. I think since this money is tied to COVID mitigation, let government not be opaque on how it manages, it utilizes this money.
Uhuru and Ruto sunk the economy beyond imagination, and with Uhuru's second term characterized by Raila joining the government through a handshake and Ruto campaigning for 5 straight years with no break. Kenyans got confused by the diversion, and of course, just like a family without protection becomes vulnerable, so did international corporations come in to take advantage of the disunited country.
$1 billion, which is equivalent today of 150 billion, never came into this country, never landed into any account here, was outright theft by a regime. And as I told you previously, the regime is very clear who is responsible
for this.
The warrants of the treasury of any money moving are signed by the President of the Republic of Kenya. Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta is personally responsible for this money.
Hakuna pesa zozote zilizopotea either kwa Eurobond ama kwa zile pesa zingine zote tulizokusanya kwa ushuru. Pesa hiyo tunatumia katika kujenga na kupanua maendeleo katika taifa letu la Kenya.
For Jimmy, it was alleged he played a key role in the earlier tendering processes of the Standard Gauge Railway, SGR, during Kibaki's reign. Other alleged government projects that Jimmy's businesses may have had a hand include the massive Lamu Port South Sudan-Ethiopia transport corridor, Lapsit, military and internal security apparatus, the construction of power plants and energy supply equipment, road expansion and maintenance, especially in the Uhuru Ruto government. Most of these projects must have been funded by external loans at some point. He is alleged to have fallen out with the government either because he was not getting the contracts or policy directions were not favoring his businesses. Or maybe he means well to Kenyans, We will never know. But Kenyans have good reasons to pay very close attention to what Jimmy says. He was part and parcel of Uhuru Ruto government put into the situation we are today, and he knows enough.
You're saying you don't agree with this broad-based government?
Not at all.
Which is one that your friend and ally has walked into and is on record, by the way, as saying that, you know, he came to the rescue of this president. He's on the record as saying that, you know, he donated some of his best minds. I mean, and no less a big chunk of his party leadership. So what do you think of a move like that you don't agree with by your friend and ally?
Maybe he has not understood the gravity of the problem and how deep this ship has sunk. Let's wait and see how long they last when they are there, because they may jump out just before it completely sinks. I would not be as confident as some people like William Ruto are that now he's united the country there.
Magazeti haya wanaandika sijui nini Raila na Ruto handshake. Hakuna handshake. Hakuna handshake.
Jimmy Wanjigi has been pouring cold water on what is happening in the Treasury at the moment. His words are not something Kenyans can ignore anymore, and most people now believe that no money was ever advanced to Kenyans.
How are they solving our problem? Every time you hear a news item, it is about money. Complaints about money.
Let us have a second thought of what Jimmy is not telling us. When a loan is borrowed from international financial institutions, certain conditions are met. First, the lenders sign a contract with the country borrowing. For example, Kenya, that any project, assuming it is a dam in this case, should be implemented by companies in the developed country issuing the loan, so money never really leaves the lender's country. Any equipment or technology to be used for the construction must be bought by the companies in the lending country. Interest rates are also set to ensure that the lending institutions and banks in the lending country benefit the most. The loans issued are also deliberately overpriced to ensure any consultancy fees is paid to companies in the country lending the money. So, in short, it is alleged that money never really leaves the lender's country to the borrowing country, in our case Kenya. This means minimal employment opportunities arise from borrowing these loans. Even with this in mind, Kenyans have not complained about the unfair terms. It does not sound like Kenyans have a choice, though. If the interests of the lending countries are presumed to be pure, the problem is, if the money that is alleged to have been lended to Kenya is without public consent and does not materialize to any project, and any attempts to find out why and where the money is, leads the majority of suffering Kenyans to nowhere.
My friend, I'll get it to you tomorrow. And if you prove...
That has been a long wait, even after following up. And today, another opportunity to seek the same with the representative of the People's Republic of China, that is the new ambassador to Kenya, Wu Peng, presented itself in his first meeting with the Editors Guild. Ambassador Wu Peng, in office for a little over 2 months, was very clear on the issue of disclosure of the SGR contract.
So they are commercial interests protected by Chinese rule of law, and it also in line with common practice. The second obstacle is every country has its own legislation, rule of law. Right? In China, we also have these kind of laws.
When Jimmy Wanjigi says that the debt we are paying is illegal, we must then investigate why the lenders lended Kenya money without the consent to Kenyans in the first place. The law in Kenya requires that Kenyans should be made aware of intended borrowing, the purpose, and how it is likely to impact the economy in the long run. There is no doubt the Kenyan elites, led by Uhuru and Ruto, were complicit in a huge borrowing that was alleged to have not benefited the Kenyan people. It is alleged that Kenya secured loans that would only benefit the corporations by allowing most of the money to flow back to the lending corporations. The law in Kenya does not allow endless borrowing, and borrowing should not happen without sufficient public participation. The Kenyan Public Finance Management Act 2012, Section 5 requires the Cabinet Secretary to borrow only with the approval of the Parliament, stating clearly the purpose of the loan, the impact on the country and its sustainability. Section 58 further states that any loan guarantees must be approved by Parliament and subjected to the same level of scrutiny as direct government borrowing. Debt obligations should not unduly constrain the national budget or jeopardize the country's fiscal stability. This means President, who is now Ruto, and the then Uhuru broke the law, and the respective cabinet secretaries of finance in the Ministry of Finance in previous and current regimes. Now, the country is using most of its earnings to pay debt at the expense of the common mwananchi, who cannot afford to eat or drink, access education, employment or healthcare. But where have all Kenyans been? The common mwananchis were divided along tribal lines, all the way from the most educated to the least. And as they argued and worshipped the politicians and religious leaders and elders in the village, the politicians were busy handing over our country to the lenders free of charge. Some Kenyans drowned their trust into Raila Amolo Odinga, who was then called Baba, with his promises to deliver Kenyans to the promised land, Canaan, for 2 decades with no success. Another set of Kenyans, boasting of tyranny and anointing from God, were busy supporting the drivers of the now sinking ship, while the last group of Kenyans have been busy minding their own business, claiming politics was not their thing. A huge majority of these Kenyans have been the educated middle class, comfortable, who have been finding public outcry through protests. A huge inconvenience until recently, when they realized politics and the economy were inseparable. Huge taxes hit their payslips and businesses collapsed, companies closed down, and now road levies are facing them. The religious leaders that I don't want to forget were there to cool off all the emotions of the different factions with prayers when they deemed fit.
Who have been elected, we also realize that many others were not successful. So we want to be with them. We know that these brothers and sisters are in need of our healing, special leading, spiritual nurturing, to enable them to move to the next stage of life.
They read the Bible and prayed in press conferences, and when the masses looked hopeless, asking for peace and calm, they would then cleanse the corrupt politicians who would become blameless. During campaign seasons, prayers, anointing, and crying in churches were tools the vulnerable masses watched for keenly to see in the churches and prayer gatherings to guide their support to State House.
A call upon all Kenyans to embrace peace and national cohesion. As Kenyans, we have committed ourselves to be guided by the rule of law.
It is well.
Ni sawa.
It is well.
Ni sawa.
It is well.
Ni sawa.
No matter how much Mheshimiwa has tried to put him together, there is a God who is bigger than him.
When need be, traditional beliefs were used to judge or could potentially be of God or evil. The one that looked like the Holy Spirit touched the most is the one that was marketed to be the chosen one and would be supported to. State House. When need be, tribal stereotypes were used to quickly silence those that did not seem to agree, and as election results were announced, celebrations were one-sided, and the rest of the Kenyans were mourning their loss as they were mocked to surrender allegiance for the country to move on, and those who could not easily do would become keyboard warriors against their fellows Kenyans, or even attend TV shows to speak out, or the Speak at the People's Assembly in Jacaranda. It was until 25th of June 2024 that we Kenyan people woke up and realized that Kenya had systematically been sold. First, it is alleged that the loans given to the Kenyan people were without their consent, and it was to ensure that lenders could bypass the democratic rights of Kenyans to accept or reject a loan, which would make it hard for corporations to impose conditions that would ensure the interests of their corporations were taken care of. The alleged avoidance of public consent in Kenya ensured that lenders avoided the complications of democratic oversight of debt, public debate, and potential public resistance. Kenyan politicians just like that are alleged to have allowed the lenders to have political leverage. The alleged surrender of political power meant allowing lenders to influence policies and political decisions, which in real senses could be interpreted as undermining the sovereign power of Kenya, making it more vulnerable to manipulation. Since Ruto rose into power, he swung into action, from legalizing genetically modified seeds.
This decision, which has been made without deliberation or public participation, will have far-reaching and catastrophic implications for the Kenya's agriculture, for the health of the Kenyan people, and our environment.
Several European countries, including France, Germany, and the Netherlands, have opted to ban the usage of GMO food. Odinga wonders what has informed the government's decision to approve GMO maize.
We note that in the most democratically and scientifically advanced countries, the question of GMOs remains one of great public concern and controversy, if not outright rejection.
To building houses for Kenyans to carbon markets.
The law that will facilitate carbon trading so that communities, people like yourself, civil society organizations, many other actors in that space can have the leverage to work in a structured manner. Because today, we do not have a clear framework on carbon trading, and many communities are being taken advantage of by people who, this calculation about carbon credit is so complicated, hardly any community would understand what the hell is going on.
And facilitation of brain drain through cheap labor to Middle East and Western economies.
Sasa we have signed bilateral agreements ambayo ni ya semi-skilled, skilled jobs and professional jobs. Kwa sababu tayari tuko na Wakenya wengi wanafanya kazi outside our country. Rais wa Ujerumani alikuwa hapa, ametueleza anahitaji wafanyikazi 200,000. Alisema mwenyewe akiwa hapa. Watu wa UAE wanasema wanahitaji wafanyikazi. Saudi Arabia, mimi naenda next month kwa sababu tumeshakubaliana, naenda kuweka sahihi, wanahitaji wafanyikazi 500,000. Na ndio sababu hawa vijana wote ambao tuko nao, that is our plan.
Ruto has been busy trying so hard to pay the ballooned national debt, which has seen him to raise taxes, because a significant portion of the national budget is being allocated to debt servicing, leaving less money for essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure, which are essential to the common wananchi. Kenyans just realized recently that the country is rich in minerals. The extent of the minerals is not clearly communicated, but the bypassing of the Kenyan people's consent in borrowing loans could mean the use of the natural resource debt swap strategy sprang into action. What this means is that when debt payment is exchanged with natural resource extraction, there is potential for overexploitation of land and minerals with minimal benefit to the Kenyan people. The resource extraction rights are granted to foreign corporations in such a way that the minerals, forests, or fisheries they have access to are handed over for extraction to international corporations under favorable terms, enabling them to make more profits. In some cases, there are long-term concessions in the mining, agriculture and energy sectors, which make it so hard for the people of Kenya to ever have any benefit. As international corporations gave corrupt politicians loans without the consent of the Kenyan people, Kenyans have remained poorer, but the elites in Kenya have gained significant wealth quickly. However, as Steve Mabogo said, the Kenyan elites only think they really are on the same table with the international corporations. But the truth is, every Kenyan, including the elites, stand to lose.
Takeover. But it's like the government does not understand where they're being led to. And these policies are not policies implemented here. These are policies given to us by these organizations, globalist organizations. These are policies pushed towards this country by these organizations to their main advantage. And the main advantage is total takeover of food production and land. So once they take over your land and they're the ones selling you food, they're saying before 2030, an individual should not eat more than 16 kilos of meat. Before 2030, an individual should not eat more than 90 kilos of dairy product in a year. They're saying before 2030, motor vehicles should be reduced in the sense that only 200 cars must be shared with about 1,000 people. So it's a big agenda and it's heading towards the 2030 agenda. But Kenyans are still sleeping, Oga. Most of these politicians who are implementing and passing these bills do not even read those bills. So it is time our politicians need to wake up. Roles of MPs are oversight, legislation, and representation. Those three. So once you take over all that land, because Kenyans are not able to afford farming, Kenyans are not able to plant or keep cattle or own land, what do? You need to relocate them. And that is why the government is building new housing projects. These politicians forget that they are also in the menu. You know, they think they're on the table. Yeah. They are also in the menu. And in fact, it will be more painful for them because most of them are the ones stealing and buying huge chunks of land. All that land will go. The ultimate goal is to take over the entire land and ownership of property from individuals to big corporations.
And maybe this is what Jimmy Wanjigi has finally realized. The Kenyan oligarchy has significant, deep-rooted businesses, and if they really meant well and their power was leveraged well, it could significantly support the Kenyan people to live decent lives. Examples is the Moi family, which has significant influence in agriculture and education, the Odinga family oil and gas, while the Kenyatta family dairy, media and tourist destination hotels. They have the ability to influence policy, support research and innovations in a way that could reduce unemployment, improve education and boost agricultural production. But like John Perkins said, his book on the confessions of the economic hitmen, the local elites and the international corporations ensures that the borrowing countries remain economically dependent and politically subservient to more powerful nations and corporations to eternity. Kenyans should just stop surrendering their allegiance to corrupt politicians or the local elites blindly without critical thinking, who have consistently kept us more dependent on them. Because this makes us vulnerable for manipulation and overexploitation without remorse.